Hello and welcome to the next event in the Westbury Memorial Public Library Virtual Author Series. I am Michelle Marcus, reference librarian and your host for today. Just to let you know, now I'm going to start having everybody on mute. And I just do that if you could put yourself on mute. And I do that during the author discussion. Then later on, if you want to ask questions, we could do that.
You don't want me on mute
Right?
though, right?
Okay, so, all right, so now later on, after we do the author discussion, we will have Q&A. So at that time, you could take yourself off of mute. If you would put, there's a button on the bottom, like reactions, which says raise your hand. So you could click on that, or if you're not sure, you can just go into the chat and you could type in your question. Either I could ask it for you, or if I see a question in the chat, then I'll call on you to ask your question. Either one is fine. Okay, so I'm really excited to speak to author Elba Perez, and let me share a little more about her. Elba Perez is from Agua Buenas, Puerto Rico, and she spent her early childhood in Roanoke, Massachusetts. And she taught theater and history at the University of Puerto Rico in Arecibo, and now lives in Houston. Her debut novel, The Things We Didn't Know, was an instant USA bestseller and inaugural winner of the Simon & Schuster's Books Like Us first novel contest. She is also the author of El Teatro como Bandera, a history of street theater in Puerto Rico. Hello, Alba, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this virtual author visit at the Westbury Memorial Public Library. I'm so excited to discuss your book, The Things We Didn't Know. And this was a wonderful book. Can you briefly tell us a little about your book, spoiler for your course? This way we can give audience members who haven't read the book yet a little introduction to the book.
Well, hi, Michelle, and thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, you're very welcome. Very
Looking
excited about
forward
this.
to meeting you all. I was just looking at the map to see where you're located, and I thought, oh, what a wonderful place. You have the ocean on the north and the south.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place.
Thank you.
Okay, well, my book is a coming of age story um, of a young girl, who's comes from Puerto Rico to the United States to live in a company town. And her mother doesn't like it there, so her parents end up divorcing. And so she spends her life coming and going between Puerto Rico and the United States. And it's about, you know, the difficulties and the types of obstacles that a child has to overcome in that situation.
That's very good. Yes. I did notice about that, like a little bit of coming age sort of thing, partially. So related to that, I was wondering if you could share a little more about the themes of this book.
Well, the themes, definitely, you know, a woman coming of age, you know, it's a woman's story, basically. Other characters that are very important in the novel are also female. And so it's very much a story about women in the 1950s, and then it goes through to the 70s. It is also the story of a female woman who is gay in the 50s, and a single parent who is a male, which is kind of not the stereotype, right? We usually talk about women being single parents, but we rarely speak of the guys. And then it's also has mental illness, you know, and drug addiction. And so there's a lot of family situations that that arise in Andrea, the main character, in her life.
Well, that was really good. Yeah, they covered a lot of different topics, and it was really interesting to see how these characters experience it, like with dealing with, their different culture and, women and men during that time period. Right, and mental illness, all those issues. I mean, especially during that time period as well. I felt also that time period had a big factor in a lot of those issues. I was wondering, what was the inspiration for this novel, and how did you decide to write about this topic and time period?
So, as you mentioned, I'm from Puerto Rico, and my father got a job in a paper mill in Warrenoco, Massachusetts. So that's a real story. That's my life. And so I came with my parents to live in Warrenoco, Massachusetts as an infant. And at the age of 12, I returned to Puerto Rico. And I did not return to Warrenoco until like 30 years later. My father had retired. And when I got there, the whole place was torn down.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a very, it really impacts you to see a place where you lived your childhood. I mean, I was there until I was 12. To see that it's disappeared, that it's all gone. And so I came across some people there and I said, there was a Puerto Rican community who used to live down there in that place called the Beehive. And the guys had no idea what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt, wow, in such a short period of time, we're already erased, you know? And so I was doing a doctorate in history at the time. And I thought, well, it's important to write about this because if I don't, who's going to do it? Somebody has to do it. Just the fact that a community of Puerto Rican workers lived in this place was something that I thought was important for many reasons. One reason being that we always hear about Puerto Ricans living on welfare, and I thought, well, these people came here to work. And so I wanted to kind of put that on the record, bring it into the history in a literary form. So that was the inspiration, that trip that I made to Warrenoco, like 30 years later.
I was wondering, so after you moved from Warrenoco, you moved back to Puerto Rico
Yes,
and you lived there for the rest of your childhood?
the rest of my life.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about that later. I'm going to get to that. I was also, if you could please share more about the main characters we were talking about. That a lot of them are, most of them are women. I mean, there are a few men, but most of the main characters in the supporting, some of the supporting, big supporting characters, also women too. And also it's important their relationships to one another. So like, Andrea, Pablo, Machi, Papa, and then like I guess like a big supporting character like Socorro, Perfecta, and even like Mama, even though she's absent a lot of it, her presence is still felt. So I was just curious if you could share more about these relationships to one another in the book, how they impacted Andrea. And yeah, so I want if you could share a little more about that.
So you want to know about all these women? Well, I started as a historian writing or thinking, that I should write about the history of these workers here. And then I started shifting to writing fiction and not a history of the workers. And there are several reasons for that. One of them was that many of the guys, the men who worked at the paper mill of the Puerto Ricans, passed away.
Mm.
And so it became increasingly more difficult for me to write about it. And it just became much easier to write fiction. So here I'm talking to you about how I shifted from writing history to writing fiction, right?
Mm.
Then the same thing happened with the characters. It was just much easier for me to write about the women. I think because they were more interesting to me.
Mhm.
And so I just imagined what it would be like to live there as an adult, because I lived there as a child. And started creating characters, and I wanted them to be varied so that you could see what what that experience was like, to live in an isolated community up in the mountains in Massachusetts, to come from Puerto Rico, to live in a place like that. So I wanted there to be younger women, older women. And I also wanted throughout the entire book, everything I do, I want to break with stereotypes. So, and try to create characters that have more depth to them, that are not a simple caricature. And so, they're all different. Machi is very different from Socorro, is very different from Perfecta. They all have different goals in life. And that's what our society is like, right? So, and that's what a community would have. It would have a variety of people. So I imagine these characters as being people who lived on another street and who I would have known when I was a kid, if that other street had existed.
Also, I found it, so relating also to the characters, I found it interesting. Like I felt like Andrea learned like different things from the different characters. So that was your intention to like introduce these different characters and teach her different lessons and stuff like that, and about her life and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, are you talking about like her aunt teaching her how to cook and things like that?
Yeah, and of course Machi and then yeah, seeing the other woman like making different life choices and stuff like that.
Right, uh-huh. Um, so what did you want me to talk about?
Uh, no, I just actually I think it was more of a comment, just
Oh,
saying
okay.
how he did a great job introducing these different characters
Well,
and
thank
showing
you.
the relationships to her. I think showing her different ways that people lived during that time and giving her different ideas and just being introduced to different people in her life. Oh,
Thank
so
you.
I'm just wondering if that was like what you were trying to, was that what your goal, what you're trying to do?
Yes, because that's what a Puerto Rican community would be like.
Mm.
That's what most communities of any culture,
Mhm.
are like. Women teach other women, things. And like her teacher who asks her if she's been doing homework, and she runs home and says, I have homework to do, it's a very, very much a woman's story. It's about the women who are who go to Orinoco, this isolated place, with their husbands, and then their husbands go to work, and they're all there with nothing to do but take care of their homes.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the main ideas that I had in mind, you know, that wanting to show how all of these women in their own way basically had to find a way of surviving this experience without going crazy,
Mhm.
because the only thing they had to do was cook, and do housework. That was the only thing they could do.
Yes, I found it very interesting. So like the contrast, as you're saying, like it's very isolated in Orinoco in the mountains of Massachusetts, and then Puerto Rico, where it's kind of like community, seemed like more people knew each other and saw each other every day, and they're out and about in the markets and stuff like that. So I found that contrast very interesting as well.
Right, and even though there's country, countryside in Puerto Rico, there are very isolated places there. It's not the same when you're in your own country and you know people and you have relatives.
Mhm.
And you know that your aunt so-and-so goes to town once a week, or, and maybe you take a ride with her, or there's public transportation. There wasn't anything in Warrenoco. There was no way out of there except your husband taking you. So these women were 100% dependent on their husbands. And this is a reality. This is what this was like.
I was wondering, was anything inspired by your real life experiences either in Orinoco or in Puerto Rico in the book?
Was anything inspired?
Hmm.
Well, I lived in Warrenoco,
Right. Hmm.
and my parents divorced and I stayed with my father.
Hmm.
So I always wanted to write about a male character raising kids, and so I did it. The character is not my father, but I did it. I created a character who raises two kids. And because as I said earlier, we talk a lot, and we need to talk a lot about single parents who are female. But then there are also the males, who are parents who love their children and care for them. I just wanted to, how there's this stereotype that Latino and Black men abandon their wives, don't care about their kids, don't provide child support. And while it may be true statistically, right, that women, we need help in that area. We need to have the parents, the fathers of the kids, right, being responsible for their kids. But I just wanted that to mention that, there's stereotypes, and statistics don't ever include everyone. And so I have the example of a father who was Puerto Rican and raised me. And I created a character who did that.
Oh, that's really interesting. So like that was kind of inspired by your experience a little bit. I was wondering, what kind of research did you need to do for this book?
Um, Quite a lot, actually. I think every book requires research. Once you put a date on there,
Mhm.
everything you write better match up to that period in time. And so it's one thing to remember the first day that the Beatles showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show, for example. But it's another thing to bring that into a novel. Because if you're going to have the whole family sitting there watching that, you better make sure you've got the time, the day of the week, all these things, and a lot of things have to come together so that all of your characters fit into that chronological date. So that's one thing. I had to research, and I really wanted every detail to be as real as possible, because then it brings it alive for the reader. This really seems like a real place to you when it all makes sense. That was one thing. And then there were places that I've never been to. And I had to do research to figure them out. Like, for example, Andrea goes to college in Amherst. Well, I've never been to Amherst. I had no idea what that would be like, but I thought, where would she go to school if she's growing up in Warnoco? Because I did not live in Warnoco when I through high school, you know. I was in Puerto Rico. I left when I was 12 years old. So that's all territory that I was less or not familiar with at all. And so I had to do research, and I contacted people in University of Massachusetts, and they wrote back because when you think about it, I thought, well, how does she get to school? Where does she live? You can't just say, oh, she went to college and then now she's talking to a guy. Where are you standing? On a sidewalk?
Yeah.
In front of what building? And so when you don't fill in those details, then the story's kind of up in the air. So I found out, that there was a bus, that it was free for students, what the name of the bus was. So when the students are talking, they tell, I'm taking X bus, and kind of have an idea of what the schedule of that bus was like. And what's the name of her dorm? Because you think, well, the first thing I did was went to Google and looked at Google Maps. And I'm like, okay, she would go up this street, down that street. And then I thought, maybe those streets weren't even there. So I contact them, and yeah, some of the buildings were not there. Some of the dorms were not there, So it takes, you've got to do research, even though it's fiction.
And I also found really interesting the parts about Puerto Rico, because I haven't personally been to Puerto Rico, and I said you lived there for many years. So those were the areas that you had lived that you mentioned in the book?
No,
Oh.
I had to do research with those as well. Because I grew up in Warnoco, and because I was there until I was 12 years old, I wanted to make sure that people were not viewing this as a memoir, because it isn't.
Right.
If I were to write a memoir, it would be a totally different story. That's not a memoir. And so I didn't want to use the places exactly where I lived, and so I went the extra mile and did a little bit of research, and the towns that she lives in and the things that happen around those towns are all fiction, but the towns are real. Like she goes to Sidra. I have been to Sidra, I never lived there. And she goes to Juncos, and I have been there, never lived there.
Let's see, did you know, if I give spoilers, did you know the ending for the book before you started, or did it come to you as you wrote the book?
Actually, that's a very good question. They're all good questions, but that one's interesting to me because nobody has asked me that.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, no one has asked that. And I knew the ending because it ends with that moment when I returned to Warnoco. And I really wanted that. And that's the only scene in the novel that is pretty much real, except that the characters are all made up. But it is true that in 2002, I returned to Warnoco. And so that part of it and the way I feel about it, I really poured into Andrea when I went to Orinoco, and how sad is like such a bittersweet thing to go back to the place where you have all those childhood memories and find it all torn down, and then get in a car and leave. And it's like saying goodbye to your childhood. So I was very emotional about, and the last page, it took me a long time to write that last page because I would start crying. Like, I don't want to say goodbye to Warnaco. I don't want to say goodbye because it's such a beautiful place. And so it was like a part that was very personal for me. It was like saying, okay, that was the place, the beautiful place, and it's gone. So let's move on.
Wow. No, that no, you did that really well. And even like when you like talked about described like well, all the places, but Orinoco, like you described, like there were certain trees and certain like the river and stuff like that. The way you described it was really great, the description of everything,
Thank you. I
all the
worked
places.
really hard on that. Um, you know, I was a historian when I was writing this, and I was struggling with the fact that I wasn't writing a history book. And so I read all the books that are behind me on the second shelf. I read like one right after the other. They're all books on writing, on craft. And I learned that you have to describe a place for people to be there.
Mhm.
But description is very tricky because if you do too much of it, then you bore the heck out of the reader, right? Who
Mhm.
wants to hear about all the leaves on a tree? We've all seen leaves on a tree.
Mhm.
So it was really something to learn how to describe a place that many of us have seen beautiful places like that, you know, wilderness areas all over the country. How do you describe it without boring your reader? And that was a challenge, but that's where I came up with things like, you know, we're on our bicycles and the sun is beating down on the road and you smell the smell of tar coming off the road and it reminds her of coffee in the morning and things like that that kind of are another perspective on rather than just saying, well, we're riding our bike on a tar, you know, a blacktop road.
Okay, I was wondering, for future books, would you like to continue writing in historical fiction genre or try different genres?
Well, I will continue writing historical fiction, but the book that I'm writing now is historical fiction with magical realism.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So I don't really know why I'm doing that yet.
Mhm.
And that's part of the process, I guess. People would call it art, you know, um, where you just feel compelled to do something and you can't really explain why. You just want to do it and you have to do it, you know. So that's the experience I'm going through now. I don't know if that's going to be my next book though, because my agent has to accept it.
Mhm.
Simon and Schuster has to like it. So, but that's what I'm writing now. I'm writing a story that is also set in Puerto Rico and the United States. I probably will do that my whole life.
Can you say what time period that will be taking place in that book?
It's 1975.
Hmm. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was just before I was born, actually.
Right. And so the thing is, I'm older than you are. And so it's just, you know, I think it was Stephen King that I saw once, or maybe I read it somewhere, that he grew up on this street and he said all of his novels are on that street. In other words, in his head, That's the town, the makeup, the composition, the way the town is put together in every one of his novels. I'm sure I read that somewhere. And so they say, write what you know.
Mm.
And he was using that as an example. And there is so much that we don't know about Puerto Rico. There is so much that I can write about that, and that's what I know. So that's what I'm writing about.
That's interesting. Some of the things you say, I found, yeah, I found other authors saying the same thing, like they've been writing things, but they know they're drawn to, like, certain things as well. So yeah, I've also heard that before as well. Um, I was wondering if you could share a little more about your background before you were a published writer. As it said that you had a background in theater, then you also wrote a book about street theater in Puerto Rico. So I was just wondering if you could share a little more about your background.
Sure. Well, I did a BA in philosophy,
Mhm.
and there's not very much you can do with that. I just couldn't make up my mind, and so I ended up in philosophy. And then for a master's degree, I went into theater
Mhm.
because I just loved doing theater. And so I did a master's degree in theater, and that opened up doors for me. So I got a job as a professor, a tenure track professor at the University of Puerto Rico Arecibo campus. And so I was there for 25 years teaching theater. I founded 2 theater groups and just, had the most incredible experience of my life teaching theater. I always say that I was getting paid to have fun,
Mhm.
and always said that I would die in the theater, that I would never, ever leave that job. And so I was married and had kids and got a divorce and was single for a long time and then remarried. And so my husband got a job in the United States, in Texas. And I thought, well, I guess I'm not going to die in that theater, you know. And, I just felt that I had to, it was time for him to have an opportunity to do something that he wanted to pursue in life too. It was just that moment in life where you have to be a part of the team, So we picked up and left, and I left the job that I loved.
Oh, mhm.
And that was very difficult for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I was sitting in a house in San Antonio, and he was working all day, and my kids had grown. And so I was all alone in a house, and I started imagining these characters from Warnoco, talking to each other in Warnoco. And that's how that happened. I kind of just, I had already explored the possibility of writing the history of the workers who came to live in Warnoco. And I knew that I couldn't do that. It was too expensive because the people who I was going to interview passed away. And so other people, I would have had to travel, to get documents, to do some research. And so I had given up on the history of workers in Waranoco. And so I was just sitting in my house and in San Antonio, Texas, when I started thinking of these characters, and I thought, why don't I write about these women? The way they used to speak, the things that worried them would come up in my mind, just things that we think about our grandmothers were concerned about. and how they wanted us to grow up. And how we actually grew up, how we actually turned out. So all these things about women through generations and women coming from another country to the United States, I thought, all of that is in my head. Why don't I just write it? And so I started writing. And it was liberating. It was very liberating because I realized I don't need an archive. I don't need to go, to a place to look up document. It's all in my head. I can make it up. So it was a transition from one thing to the other. All happened because my husband got transferred to the United States.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing about that. And oh, I was wondering if you could share about your experience as part of the Books Like Us contest. And that sounded like a really exciting opportunity.
Oh my God. That is, I will always be, there will never be anything in my professional life more important. There will never be anything that will surpass that moment. I don't know if you've seen it. I hate it. There's a video that they did when they announced that I won, and I was a total mess, But so I was sitting on the back porch. Now I'm living in Houston, and I still have that story. I had sent it out to 15 agents, and none of them were interested. But one agent wrote back and said, "The writing is beautiful. Let me know if you have if and when you have another story. This one just doesn't fit my, what she was looking for at the moment." And so that said, you can write. You're writing, it's okay. Keep doing it. So I'm sitting on the porch and I'm going through a magazine. I don't remember what magazine it was, but it was Poets and Writers or Writer's Digest. And I saw this ad, Books Like Us, first novel contest. And this is 2021. And let's see, I wrote it down here. On June 3rd of 2021, I submitted to that contest. And so, but when I saw that, I thought, Books Like Us. Now remember, I spent most of my life in Puerto Rico. So when I look at these things about diversity and that kind of theme, I have to kind of pause to figure out what they're talking about sometimes, because that's something happening here in America, in the United States. And so I thought, Books Like Us. I think this has to do with minorities. That's what I thought. And then I thought, well, Puerto Ricans are a minority, but I'm a redhead. They're not going to be interested in me because the stereotype of Puerto Ricans, I don't fit that stereotype. And I said, screw it. I'm sending it. I'm Puerto Rican, whether anyone likes it or not, I'm Puerto Rican. So I'm sending it, and I sent it. And that was just unbelievable because you get notified that you are one of 10 semifinalists, and then you're one of 3 semifinalists. And, at each time I was like, I'm older probably than most of these people writing, and there I am, And so I won. I
That's a
won.
great story. And I know it's very inspirational to hear like different authors who get their start later in life. And I always loved hearing your story as well about that.
Exactly. And I think I'm an example of that. Absolutely. You know, here I thought my career was done. You know, my it was all about my husband's career now, and here I am, a published author.
Well, that's great. I was wondering, our audience and I love to hear book recommendations. Can you please share some books that you read recently that you enjoyed?
Books that I've loved. Well, I have to say one of my favorite books is um Ocean Vuong,
Mhm.
On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. It's a coming of age gay Vietnamese in the United States, first generation. And so, oh, it's so deep and I just saw something last night where this book is actually banned in Texas, where I live.
Mhm. Mhm.
So unfortunately. And then I loved this, The Night Travelers. This is a fabulous story. Armando Lucas Correa. This is coming from Germany, Nazi Germany, to Cuba, you know, and it's night travelers because they travel at night so as not to be seen. And it has race. It is a beautiful story. What else can I say? Of my favorite, I have to say this was kind of strange because it's another culture so foreign to me that, you know, it took a while for me to kind of figure it out, the things we lost. And Okwiri Oduor, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. But this is, I still don't know if I understand what it's about, you know, but it's about this little girl who is constantly left alone by her mother. And so she is hearing the spirits of her ancestors. And so whether they're taking care of her, whether she's imagining things, you know, it really is an exploration into what happens to a child who is left alone, I think. Um, a lot of the experiences she has, you know, you wonder, did this really happen? Or is this the little girl imagining things? And then, oh my God, I wish I had known you were going to ask me this. Because then, up on that shelf, can you see it? Can you see me?
I can't see what the books are. I see your shelf though.
Okay, so now I'm reading books about witches
Ooh.
because the book I'm writing has magical realism in it. So I'm reading to see how they construct these stories to get the reader to believe that this magical thing is real. You know, how do you convince a reader of this reality that is so different from our common day experience? So those are Louisa Morgan and this, and of course, so do you want me to show them all to you?
If you want to, I mean, you don't.
Sure. Well, of course, Neil Gaiman, you know who he is.
Mhm.
Neil Gaiman, um, Stardust. It's probably my favorite book of all books in the world. And then Alice Hoffman, her
Mhm.
series of witch books. And then this book, The Night Circus. These are all books that have taught me that I can free my mind and just anything goes, you know, and because it's very hard to think that you can actually write about something so unreal and that a reader will believe it. So reading these books has helped me, to see how others have done it. And then House of Roots and Ruin. This is a gorgeous Aaron Craig. So those are all my recent reads.
Oh, that's great. That's a lot of great and especially all different types of suggestions too, which is great. At this time, if anyone wants to ask a question of Elba, if you want, either you could ask in the chat or you can go to where it says reactions and then do the raise hand part, and then you can go off mute and then ask a question. Okay, Marilyn, if you want to go first, if you have a question or comment that you'd like to ask.
Do have several comments and questions. No, the book was fantastic. I
Thank
just
you.
found out. I just found out about it on Monday night, and I read the book like on Tuesday. I couldn't put it down.
Oh, that is
So
such good news.
you succeeded in just keeping the pace going. I was just like, what's going to happen next to these kids? What's going to
Mhm.
happen next? So I just thought that was very, very well done. I
Thank you.
also adored your description of Puerto Rico, the
Mhm.
lushness of the scenery. It was just
Thank
very
you.
evocative of the place. Um, I like the way the book started with the mama and the car incident. And was that something just totally out of your imagination, or had
Yeah.
something like happened in your
Yeah.
neighborhood?
Well, I remember once that I was in the car with one of my aunts, and her husband was teaching her how to drive. And she was like, no, 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 I don't want to do this. And she stopped the car and got out and she said, I don't want to go down one of those cliffs. And
Oh,
she just got off the car. And then, a child's imagination is wild. And so I remember as a child thinking, ooh, what if she had not stopped the car? Nothing happened. But
yes, I
then,
got, but
they say start the book on a cliffhanger. That's what they say in all the writers' conferences, start books on a cliffhanger so the reader. And I just remembered that incident and I said, well, I'm literally going to do that.
well, it was a great beginning, and the
Thank
pace of the
you.
book was great. We really didn't. Uh, you said it wasn't a memoir. I wondered if it was considered autofiction, which is a genre that's coming, to be talked about these days. Um, I don't know how you feel about that terminology.
I don't know, because the thing is that the plot and what happens to the characters is not what happens to me. And it's not, none of the characters are real.
Mhm. Well, I don't know all the characteristics of that, but it did come to mind, and I'm glad you mentioned it wasn't a memoir. I wondered about that
No,
as I was reading through.
yeah,
And then we didn't really talk too much about racism that was portrayed in the book, but that was definitely a topic of interest that, um, okay, hey, I raised and now I moved away, and I did live in Massachusetts for a brief time, but and Texas, and but now I'm back in Arkansas, and I just Puerto Ricans, I just don't know any, and
oh, okay.
So the racism issue was interesting aspect of the book.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm a historian, and anything that I write, I'm going to try to portray things as accurately as possible. And in many instances here, I have heard that Puerto Ricans are not racist, Latinos are not racist. And that always bothers me because it's so far from the truth, you know? So I wanted to include a situation where one of the characters is racist, you know, to show that, yes, there are racist Puerto Ricans.
Well, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you for reading my book.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next I'm going to have Sharon answer a question, then I have a question from Judy in the chat.
Hi, thank you all. I want to thank you for coming. And
Hi, Sharon.
I haven't finished it, so I'm halfway through, but I only got the book just like 2 days ago. So sort of like what Marilyn said, and I've had so much going on. I got to get back to the book, and and I actually got it in 3 formats. So I have it like on an ebook, and then I have the book itself came in, and then I also I paid for the Audible.
Oh,
So that when I'm
wow.
doing stuff, when I was reading, I could actually hear it. And I've been going
Thank
back and
you
forth
so
with the 3,
much.
but I'm only like just slightly more than halfway through and really enjoying it. And 2 things I wanted to ask about is actually I wanted to say my comment on I really enjoyed from what I'm up to the relationship of Andrea and her brother Pablo. So I really am enjoying that part of it. I don't want to
I
know any
have,
more about it. But.
we are 6 in my family, but I am the oldest, and then there's a boy, male, who is close in age to me. And then there are 4 who are younger than us. And so him and I were always, you know, really close. And that's where that comes from.
It was very sweet, and I really enjoyed that. What I wanted to ask about though, because yes, there's racism in it, but I wanted to ask, like, I was actually surprised that it wasn't so overt racism in the beginning when they first came to the when they first moved there, and she felt like they were accepted even though they were the only Puerto Rican family, and then obviously the father brings more family there. But so I wanted to know if that was sort of your feeling, that that there was some acceptance. Like, I wasn't expecting that.
Some acceptance of who?
Some acceptance of Puerto Rican of Spanish, of kids wanting to learn Spanish is how some of that was presented in the beginning. I was sort of surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what your question is. That
the people who were born in the continental U.S. Were somewhat accepting of these 2 children who
right,
came from a different culture,
right.
So I was expecting that there would be overt racism really throughout.
Oh, no. Uh-huh. Right. So yeah, as a child, I felt accepted by everyone around me in Warnoco. Of course, I'm a redhead. That could have something to do with it, you know. But you'll see there's stories in there about what Andrea goes through, even though she's a redheaded Puerto Rican.
Yes. So yeah, and then that feeling of differentness or wanting to be the same. I mean, that came through, or wanting to belong, actually.
That wanting to belong, I think, is the main theme of that novel.
Yeah.
Now that you brought that up, I think when Michelle was asking me earlier, what are the themes? I think wanting to belong has to be the main theme of that novel.
Yeah. And I know there's other people. There's only one other thing I wanted to say. I really appreciated a lot of the Spanish that's in there. So,
thank you so much.
And that's why I brought up the format. So when I had the ebook, I'm pushing the button and then going to Google Translate because I know some of it, but I don't know others. So it was.
Well,
I really
you don't
enjoyed
have to do that, because what I did was that in every sentence that there is a Spanish word, there is an explanation of it in there. Like, for example, if somebody says estúpida, then the other person will say, why are you calling me stupid? So you know what the word meant. So if you just keep reading, you probably don't need to be looking for Google Translate. And I do that to the point where on Goodreads, a woman wrote that bothered her. She said, oh, you're shoving this down our throat. First you say it in Spanish, then you say it in English. So I was like, oh, well, I was trying to make it easier. So people wouldn't be going to Google.
I just
But
want to, yeah, I'm enjoying it. So thank you.
thank you so much for reading my book.
Okay, I have a question from Judy in the chat. She asked, how was the role of women different in the US and Puerto Rico?
Of the Puerto Rican women, I suppose she's asking about the Puerto Rican women, or is she asking about Puerto Rican women versus American women? I'm not sure.
I think Puerto Rican women versus American women.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Puerto Rican women were very did you read the whole novel?
I wasn't able to finish it. Not yet.
Okay. So there's a character in the novel called Socorro, and she actually confronts the Puerto Rican idea of what women should be like. And so the roles of Puerto Rican women versus American women are very different. You know, by that time in the United States, women were, I would say, much more liberated, you know, than the Puerto Rican women were. And so the Puerto Rican women were like Middle Ages. Like you couldn't go out without a chaperone, for example. Young women did not go out on dates. When I was growing up, you couldn't wear shorts, you could not wear pants. So very much a very conservative, traditional Catholic mentality, but like strict, very strict. So girls are taught they have to be virgins, they can't be alone or can't be seen alone with a guy. And so my character has to live with that. That's one of the themes also, you know, how do you live, how you grow up in a culture when your parents are trying to keep you in another culture. So when you walk out the door every day, you're in another reality, but then you're not allowed to be like them. So there's us and them. There's this difference, you know. There's so many differences. The
Thank
Puerto
you.
Rican women like didn't drive cars, didn't go to work. It was not considered appropriate for women to work out of the house. I remember that. I remember the first Puerto Rican woman that got a job when I lived in Orinoco. And oh, that was considered by some of the men, right? Like, oh, that woman is working. You know, she should be home with the kids.
8:00. Please be aware that the computer lab will be closing at 8:30.
So I was waiting for her to finish that announcement.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Okay, I know Marilyn has another question. Did anyone else? I will get to yours, but does anyone else have a question? Adrian? Do you want to, let me put you off mute? Did it work?
Okay. First of all, I have not read your book yet, but it sounds incredible and I cannot wait to read it.
Thank you.
I love historical fiction. It took on so many different topics. I mean, from racism. You also mentioned that a character was gay, and in the 50s, that was so unacceptable. Like, how did you manage that in the book?
Exactly. You know, every family or say every community, you know, we've all grown up seeing gay people our whole lives. You know, I doubt that there's a person who can say, I never saw a gay person before, you know? And so I just felt that as a historian, you know, you see that some people, gay people, older people, children, women, until recently, have been excluded from history. Workers. History used to be about kings and queens and the wars and who won the war and who was elected. Oh my God, who was elected president and those kinds of things. And so as a historian, you know, I learned that we need to write about those people who exist in society, but are invisible in the history books. They're not there. And so that's where this character comes from. My desire to enrich my writing, you know, with a diversity of characters.
Okay. Did you make the character accepted? Because in the 50s, that a gay person was never accepted.
Well, when you read it, you'll see
I'll
she
see. Okay.
goes through, you know, she has her challenges.
Okay.
And the kids love her, but there comes a point where they question whether they should love her. So that was that moment when you all who haven't read that, when you read that, remember what I'm gonna say. I cried when I read that because I thought I have to do this. You know, how does a child feel when they're told it's bad to be that way? And you love that person.
Wow.
How does a child react to that? You
That's
love
tough.
that person, but you're told that's not good. So I just got into it, you know, and put myself in the place of the children who deal with that gay character.
Well, I really can't wait to read this book now.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I'm very proud of it. I worked really hard.
Yes, you can absolutely tell that.
I worked really hard.
Thank
I'm
you.
just gonna say it was really good. Like as I said, it just covered so many topics, and it was, as Marilyn also said, it was really engrossing and just got really into it and all the different things that you mentioned in there.
Yes, and I have seen again, you know, Goodreads, where somebody says, "Oh, this story just has too many topics," and I just feel like saying, you know, hello, a lot of things happen in a community. You know,
Yes.
I'm trying to portray a community of people who came from Puerto Rico to live in this country and work here, and the children who grew up in that environment. And so there's a lot of things that happen in a community. So there's gay people, there's women who leave their husbands, there's all kinds of things. I don't want to give anything away, give more away.
I know Marilyn, you wanted to say something. Did anyone else want to say anything or ask any questions? Okay, Marilyn.
Sharon made me think of this. I followed along with the audiobook, and the audiobook is fabulous.
She's
Just wanted
so
to
good,
share
the
that.
woman
She
who
was,
read it.
yes, it was really great. And
She's excellent.
yes, and I'm just sitting here going, gosh, and we didn't talk about this or this or this. You know, I won't say anymore, but there is so much in your book we didn't even touch on. poverty and neglect and maternal
Yes.
abandonment, all those things. I mean, it was,
Yes.
you packed it in, and I don't think it was too much, though. I'll just say, based on that criticism, I would disagree. I thought it just flowed right along with the reality of a lot of people.
It's life. Life is full of a lot.
Yes.
So for
That's why-
those of you who, like Marilyn just said, you can follow me, you can email me, and we can continue talking anytime you want.
Thank you. That's really nice. I was actually going to say that, yeah, if you can include like how people can contact you, because if they're interested in
So-
learning more and stuff.
And as long as you have my name, I have a Facebook, Elba Iris Perez, and I have an Instagram, and you can write to me, elbaIrisPerez@gmail.com. So, yeah, get in touch and just put Westbury Memorial, so that I remember who you are. But yes, please get in touch and please give me reviews on Goodreads.
Oh, definitely will.
We really need that, especially a debut author, because, at the time when I submit my second novel, they're going to look to see how many reviews did she get. Because for the publisher, of course, it's a business. So reviews are important.
I was going to say, I actually have a question I wanted to ask you later because I think it might have been a spoiler. So maybe I'll, message you on Instagram or something like that about it.
Sure. What is it about, though? Can you give me
It has to do with the mother and son, but parts of the things
the
that kind
mother
of-
and son?
Yeah, well, I don't really want to go into because I am part of it's kind of revealed later in the book. So I don't know if that's a spoiler or not, but
Oh, okay.
I'll explain it. I get a message. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. It was really hard writing that story,
Mhm.
because you always do include some of yourself in it. Of course, that's the whole book is me. I made it up, so it's coming out of me. And my parents were divorced. And so, a lot of what you go through, you just write it in a different character or at a different moment, but it's all the emotional baggage that we all carry is obviously in and going to be in all my books.
Mhm.
And that when you mentioned the relationship between the mother and the son, that just brought back to me why I created the mother and the son and the father and all of them. And it's things that you see also in other people, hardships that people go through in their lives. So I'm just rambling here, but I'm talking about, where we get these ideas and where these emotions come from.
No, I'm finding this all very interesting, everything you're saying. So, and I'm sure everyone else is too. So thank you so much. And so thank you for doing this virtual author visit with the Westbury Library. And we all enjoyed hearing from you, talking with you. And I just wanted to let you guys know our next virtual author visit is with Joan Legion. She was originally from Westbury, and she's the author of the short story collection Displaced Persons. And it's on Thursday, June 20th at 7 p.m. and you can register on the website. So good night to Elba and to all of our attendees.
Thank you so
again
much for
attending.
having me. I
You're so
really,
welcome.
I have felt
Enjoyed it.
really at home with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
again. It was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a good
so
night,
much for your
everyone.
support.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
You too.